Hello and welcome to another video on the intermediate React. So in today's video, I'm going to make a quick recap what I have learned so far. And first things first, uh, thanks to Brian Hall for this series of videos, a software engineer that has previously worked on Netflix, Reddit, Microsoft, and right now he is the PM of Snowflake, a database as a service provider. And the goal of this intermediate React version 5 is to help business to write production ready React applications. That's the entire goal of this. So, and based on the Brian Hall experience, he mentioned that, well, what are the techniques and strategy that you can use as a way to do that? So these techniques and strategy and tools that we're going to learn are the advanced techniques in terms of performance, such as code splitting and server-side rendering, as well as testing and transition. And the tools here is Redux, TypeScript, and Tailwind. So a word of hooks in depth, because previously we have looked at what are the introduction of the React, what is the value proposition of React, which is I got a state that I want to generate view out of it, okay? And then the React core concept, at least right now, in version 18 and at the date of this recording, uh, March 3, 2020, 2024. And that is the GSX, the hooks, use effect, custom hooks, as well as component composition and class components, as well as functional components. In a word of Dev, React DevTool, and subtle things, especially on the no environment flag and the strict mode. This is the core of React. And then some of the capabilities, such as React Router, React Query, as well as sorry, React Router, React Query, uh, as well as the special use cases, such as error boundary and context. So with that huge overview, which is something that we did on the React complete intro here, as a way to develop a sense of what is this, okay? What is the thing? What the things is doing? This complete intro to React. I just want to let's wait for the sidebar, this cycle menu actually load. As you can see here is this the core React concept like GSX, okay, hooks, effects, all right, a component composition. The other is handling user inputs as well, whether it's form control form or uncontrolled form. React DevTools, okay, and the React capability, which is something that we mentioned, right? The React Router version 6 and how they have changed that router several times. The React Query, as well as the control and uncontrolled forms, and the class components and how to handle events in class components. What are the subtle difference between the class component and functional component, as well as the special React cases, special case in React tools, the error boundaries, the models, how you can use that using portals, and context. So the idea of this video, or today's video, or this series of videos and the goal of this course, something that we mentioned. And right now, this is a structure like hooks in depth, something that we are going to, something that I saw, tailwind as well, advanced React performance, which is the focus of today's video, low priority re-rendering, TypeScript, Redux, and testing. So the first things here is just a quick recap of this hook in depth, and that is where are the most where you can use these particular hooks, because after all, remember that this is Facebook problems, and the vast majority of companies wouldn't have that kind of problem, not at the beginning. Okay, so the idea of this is that to recognize that what are these particularly special cases in this hooks in depth. Uh, for example, the use ref, which is it holds a reference. So you can think of this use ref as like putting sticker notes in your room, different things, all right? As a way to now identify and put some information. And in the context of React, it's like putting this sticker notes or this reference for letting on use that object or use that DOM element. The other is the reuse reducer, useful when you want to actually keep track is the state of when for keep tracking is when the state change. So when you want to use this, for example, when you actually are very important here, especially on UI, as a way to now where this state come from and how this state is changing over time. So we use Reducer for that, which is also part of the Redux. How can we use that? By generating as a new state, which after all, this use Reducer, it takes a it's just a fancy name to say this is a function that takes a state and an action and return a new bit of state. Okay. I also look at the use callbacks and use memo, very specific for performance optimizations. Again, performance is premature optimizations can be the root of all evils. And as you move on, the idea of this use callbacks and memo is to only render like child components once. Okay, depending on the use case, you might want to use that or not. So before having a problem, or first, especially on optimizations, first have a problem before solve a problem, and for anything I will argue. So the other is the use ID and the use layout, because use ID is useful for mainly use cases forms, okay, as a way to as a way to give an ID to a label and the input on the form. You do not use this for uh, identify the elements on V4 or in the in rendering elements. You should use your own data, perhaps using UUID for that. And the other is the use layout effect. So the difference between use effect is because use effect will trigger after a renders end, the render function ends, but it's not synchronous. It means that it won't wait for the element to get rendered. In use layout will. So when you can use this use layout effect? Well, uh, again, very narrow specific. Remember, this is Facebook problem. For example, when you need to actually is rendering elements or let the user resize elements on that, that is a very useful use cases. Let's say for even if you are going to creating a Figma design or Figma app this designer website that need you to actually resize elements for boxes or circles, ellipses, that kind of thing, yes, that's exactly a great use case of use layout. So you don't render the element twice, which is what will happen if you use only use effect. All right, this is a great overview of use layout or the use hook or the hooks in depth. Then we look at a tool called Tailwinds, something that I'm quite familiar with because Tailwinds is this methodology of way of writing CSS. You can build on top of that is the design system such as Bootstrap or Material UI, but it's not super opinionated about it. And the way how it works is by adding this tiny class to your elements. Now the compiler, the TypeScript compiler, take it and generate is a minified version of your CSS. So you may wonder what is the difference between Bootstrap and Tailwind, the material design. Is a material design Bootstrap. When you build a website on that, you know that that was a website was built using Bootstrap. So this is valid for internal apps, okay? But you don't care about the look and feel as long as they are nice and usable, okay? But for things outside of that scope, you perhaps want to write your own CSS or need to write your own CSS. And that is when you find useful write tailwinds. What is a trade-off? Is that you end up with that ugly uh, and long CSS class in each one of your elements. The reason of using a utility class-based CSS, according to Tailwinds, something based on my experience, is that you will not, or it will make much more sense. It'll make much more sense when it comes to maintain utility class CSS rather than large CSS code base because maintain HTML elements is easier than maintain a huge code, large code bases. And also, especially if you have a global style, perhaps when you're adding some styles, you can get usually conflicts unless you actually split that files so you can load that in each models. Again, what happened is that you end up with now being more explicit about how you have to write your own CSS. The specificity here is very, very important. Something that other CSS in JavaScript like emotion, yeah, so like emotion, uh, style components, CSS model actually do that for you. And I really love use CSS model for that. So how can we use this? Well, by installing a tailwinds, and then using post CSS, which is this Babel, like this Babel, but for CSS. So it turns file. That's to me something interesting here, because when you take a look at the post uh, post CSS, exactly. And you take a look at the post CSS here. Okay. Hello. Well, right now it's raining out there. Perhaps that might perhaps that influence that post CSS. What about now? No, it's not responding. What about now? Post CSS. If you don't respond, then what I'm gonna do is say okay. Oh my god. Okay. Well, no problem. Let me actually do is the hot. Let me actually do a quick check here. Really? Okay. Mm-hmm. Suppose CSS. That's right. Okay. Okay. Here we are. And welcome. Welcome back. Okay. So this is post CSS. That's right. So yeah, even though they describe quickly what it does, the post CSS architecture, and as you can see, this is a transpiler. So because they take the CSS that you write, uh, and then pass through several plugins. First, pass through a parser, and that parser, the output of that will be paused by several plugins. Okay, as a way to well do whatever that plugin needs to do, and then finally is uh, stringify your CSS. Okay, so to get you new CSS. So the idea here is that once you're able to look at this and combine that with something called auto prefixer, okay, on EPN, this plugin is a post CSS plugin. So this plugin allows you to use is the modern CSS that will work in any browser. So that's very, very, very interesting, right? Yeah, the TLDR is like that. And it's actually very, very active. As you can see here, it's very, very active. Very, very active. So, uh, then I look at how you can install Tailwind running an npm command, and then how by now running the init config, you can look at that is generate is a post CSS as well as Tailwind configuration file. How can we use is a ES or prior plugin for auto formatting is our Tailwind style, which is good. Thanks for that. Actually, it took me quite a while. I have some issue here with breeder, by the way, especially when I dedicate time to that. It's like, okay, okay. Sometimes it works, sometimes doesn't. I need to reload the window. Anyway, this is something there. And then look at how you can now style your applications. How you can uh, enhance your applications by using plugins as a way to format, for example, forms. So Tailwind form actually is something that is come by default. It's a plugin for that. Also, how you can now extend CSS using is the layer CSS rule, and how by default when you starting to initialize is your CSS using Tailwind, how you need to add is particularly custom rules, which is Tailwind, okay, like base, something that we have here. Let me actually make a quick recap. Do I have that? No, Visual Studio Code here. Da, 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 da. Mm, 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 mm. Oh my god. Will you open that? Okay, good, good. Oh no, no, no. That's fine, fuck. Okay. Hmm. Jesus. What? That's not good. Come on. Would you? Come on. So we lost internet. Anyway, okay. Well, anyway, Jesus, you die? Oh, nigga. Why you die, man? Will you explain me? You tell me why you die? Will you come back? Mm-hmm. Question: would you come back? Okay. Would you come back? Okay. What about you? That's right. And okay. Yeah, there is an issue here with there's an issue here anytime I open Visual Studio Code. Sometimes, not always. But sometimes that I open Visual Studio Code that I get some issue with uh, the wireless gone. Mhm. It's like there is some instruction behind the scenes that actually is blocking Bluetooth or anything related to any wireless device. So Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and then I need to shut it down, enable again. This is something that from Windows exact. This is just something exclusively for Windows 11, man. Oh man. Anyway, here we are, back to home. Okay, so let me take a look at the here. No, please don't save that. I just want to show is where we are, which is here. Browser. What about the code? No, okay. What I want to show is this, the context. That's what I want to show here. Code. There you go. Okay. And bam, here we are. So the point of this here is to well take a look at how we set up tailwinds, right? And especially on your source, your style, you say, hey, this is what we're gonna use, right? So this is a set of rules that each one of them override the another. So for example, utilities, this is when you have things. So from base, this is when you have things like, hey, let's going to reset the body, how the body should look like at an initial state, how the components, which is, uh, hey, how this text should look like, and then utility. For example, is this active? Is this not? Hover, what you can do on that. And utility override components, components override base, and that's the order of precedence. So in our case, because after we look at how you can use, how you can style in your CSS component, and then how you can is now enhance your plugin or enhance your Tailwind using plugins. In our case, by using Tailwind CSS form, okay, it's a way to give certain formats or basic reset for our form. How we can now is then extend the CSS functionality by using something called layer here as this. So components and utilities, okay, and how by defining inside of them you can is make use of the current uh, tailwind or current tailwind class with the apply. The whole point of this is to recognize that you might be tempted to go to write your own CSS, okay, but that defeat the whole purpose of using tailwind. And context switching is destroying your productivity. Don't ever do that. It's like when I look at uh, Brian Holt's face saying that, it's like, oh my god, yeah, you're right. Based on my experience as well. So context switching, no, no. Okay, so with that, right? Then I also look at how you can is layout, okay? Because one of them is to extend the Tailwind CSS using, for example, layout, enhancing the tailwinds, and the other is how do you give layouts to this, and also with breakpoints. That is something. That's one of the reasons why I get so uh, sticky. That that actually is very cool about Tailwind, which is the ability to let you define its grid or any uh, layout there, as well as how it's going to behave in a particular breakpoint. For example, small, medium, large, X large, you name it. That's something that will take you a lot of time to do that. Uh, and actually, now you can easily do that with Tailwind so far, which is great. Awesome. Okay. So once you do this, okay, and then after we finally look at the benefit and the trade-off of using that, we move on to the advanced techniques, which is advanced React performance, like this. So the code splitting. So the whole point of code splitting is that if you want to load your application fast, because this is a React performance concern, and one of the great thing of this React version 18 is that now makes code splitting and server-side rendering plays well together, something that perhaps in the older version they didn't. And because I come from a view background, it's like, okay, interesting. Uh, and now, when you take a look at the React core and the React DOM from that particular from Bumblephobia website, I think it's this. If we take a look at this, so here it's telling you, hey, how what is the size? Oh no, click to view. What? So what is the size of the bundle? Again, this is the developer surface, and you got this the React DOM, React React DOM, React React DOM, copy of the React DOM 15. Uh, hmm. exactly. But this is React DOM. Okay, DOM, React DOM. Okay, you got it. Yes, now this is the library that talk to the DOM, right? And it's actually 42 kilobytes. The developer surface is 2.5. So this makes something around something less than 45 kilobytes. And if you set your metric, okay, if you want to make your initial load to 100 kilobytes, uh, that's what you need code splitting. So the idea of the code splitting is to say, hey, I want to load only the necessary code that I want to load only the necessary code to teach your app get up and running, so the user sees something immediately, and then in the background hurry up everything else. And by doing that and following this particularly strategy, because this is when we need to follow is uh, which bundle we want to, or which what will be the strategy to actually implement this. Because again, here we're not enforcing is that 100 kilobyte should be your initial code, but you should definitely have a code budget for your application. So for example, the idea here is that you want to try to stay under something, or to reach a performance goal, okay, or performance timing you're trying to hit. Whatever is the case, okay. For example, in the bundle size, you want to stay uh, when you want to stay under that metric, or when you want to improve the performance you're trying to hit. The idea here is to use this code splitting uh, and define what is a reasonably amount of time that your user should wait before your app get loads, or before your app shows something today. So that's what we have, for example, web vitals metrics. Web vitals metrics here, especially web vitals metrics like, I love how they load this application. You gotta love that. The HTML, CSS. Mm-mm-mm. Come on, do that again. All right. Uh, exactly. So, for example, here the large contentful pane, okay, is 2.5 seconds. The interaction in the next pane, which is now the new metric that they're using for interactivity, interaction to next pane, and the CLS, which is cumulative layout shift for that. Experimental, pending, and stable. Okay, so this is the metrics, okay, that now is switched to English, please. Okay, so this is the metric that now is being used for that. Phil Walton for that, Mary Polar for that. Let me take a look at that. Exactly, it's very, very, it's precise. It's like, hey, is this? Is precise, is this? To your performance, to your security, to your usability. Okay. Turn your security and turn your usability. Okay. Yeah, that's their website. Cool. But the idea here is to look at this particular metrics. Okay. Uh, an overview of that. And how by following this metrics, uh, how you can use this Google metrics as a way to say, hey, I would like to this application load under 2.5 seconds. Okay. To ensure you're hitting this target to most of your user, a good threshold to measure is 75% of page load, segment across mobile and desktop device. So why is this? Why we using is code splitting uh, for this? So because if you're building an app or if you're writing an app, for example, like Uber Helicopter, uh, well, this now is discontinued. They probably have nice phones, a decent connection, and you can probably have a pretty high performance budget. That's the way how you can identify if you need to actually do performance optimizations or not. Okay? Again, premature optimizations can be the root of all evils. That's what it is. But if you're writing something that keeps tracks of a farmer that's watering their crops frequently out in the bunnies, this bunny phrase is something interesting, but I didn't know about it. This is the way colloquially how they mention that something is in the wild, bunnies, and they call bunnies based on because uh, soldiers back in the Filipino wars, they called a mountain bunnies here. Uh, there is a colloquial shortening of boondocks, which is remote and wild place. Boondocks, like this. So boondocks is a word that comes from Tagalog boondock, mountain that was adopted for American soldiers in the Philippines for remote and wild place. Tagalog boondock, mountain. If you take a look at this Tagalog boondock, mountain, in Hangala, boondock means mountain. Boondocks. So they use this word of boondock to say something that is far, remote, lost. All right. Okay. Very narrow specific. Very, very narrow specific. And instead of saying boondock or the boondocks, is now is to say boonies. So something else, something out there in the something out there in the boonies, boonies, boondocks. That's very, very interesting. Uh, yeah. So if you're running a app that keeps track uh, that keep track of a farmers that's watering their crops frequently out there in the boonies, so they have a terrible 2G connections, whether it's in the South Dakota, La Pampa in Argentina, Australia, India, and Amazonas in Brazil. So your performance budget is very sensitive. So things like this becomes very helpful. So what you're gonna do is split things out in your main package. So right now you're not gonna see what I'm gonna do here, which is actually take a look at that particular course because they already received a strike from they actually sent me is okay. Oh, that's not good. Okay, much better. All right, here we are.
So details equals b, and then you give it a function
Okay,
state. What we're going to do is we're going to start splitting things off of our main package. So let's go to app.jsx, Dakota, or so what we're going to do is we're going to start splitting things off of our main package.
all right, let's go. Let's go for it. So what we are going to do is to split things out of our main package.
So let's go to app.jsx, and up here where we import React, right here, please import useState, lazy, and suspense with a capital S. Okay, I want you to delete details and search params, the imports here. We're going to split off our various different routes from our app so that it's only loading the route the user is loading. We're going to split off our various different routes from our app so that it.
Mm-hmm. Which is the code splitting. So we are, so we are, so we are going to split out the different routes in our app.
It's only loading the route the user is loading.
Okay. So that is only loading that is only loading the route exactly. That is only loading the route the user okay. That is only loading the route the user is loading. That is only loading the route that that the user is loading. So the user is loading. Why is that? This is part of a thing that by doing this code splitting, a very useful technique for doing this code splitting, especially in large applications. So, for example, Nuts is something that actually do that behind the scenes when they see things like, hey, uh, all of this route that you're defining here, well, what's going to make now is lazy, which is only when the user click here we're going to actually load that. Uh, there are also things like prefetch that actually is an attempt to guess that the user actually wants to fetch that or already have or hold the DNS direction when the user hover on that. So on the click, so you don't have to resolve the DNS because you already did that. You now is going to talk directly to the server. So this is all techniques as a way to improve the user experience.
So I'm going to say const details equals.
So in our case, so we're gonna load all of this. So as you can see here, so we're gonna split our different routes in our apps that only load the route the user is loading. Exactly. So in our simple use case is this by deleting. This is on the context, but I want this to go to this. I want to take a look at this. Here we're gonna delete is that. Okay. We're gonna use lazy and suspend. And we're going to now is say, hey, cons detail. Okay. I'm gonna say is a cons detail. Okay, cons details here I want you to now say exactly lazy, but I just want to understand where is this thing coming from. So lazy, which now it will receive is a callback here, where we're going to import, which is a valid, uh, which is a valid API from JavaScript. Hey, you're gonna now talk to this API, which is import, and then what you to import is the details. And I want to do the same for the search pattern. Okay, search patterns. Okay, like lazy here. We're gonna do the same. So the idea here is that we are splitting is the routes that the we're splitting here the routes the user we are splitting routes that loads when the user is loading. So what you're gonna do is the import here and say, hey, I want you now to import is search pattern, search search pattern, search patterns. Okay, so this is us telling you. So right now you're not able to see what I'm doing, which is here. But this two line here is saying, hey, okay, now we're going to actually is load this lazy. So how can we actually indicate in the HTML when to do that, right?
Lazy equals lazy, and then a function that returns import details. In search params, lazy import search params. If you are not familiar with import, this is a function that's built into JavaScript, right? So it's a built-in function. That's why we're not importing it or anything like that. And this works like require used to for
Mm-hmm. Totally. This word like require, for example, here. So this, so import here works like require in Node.
CommonJS. These
In Node or in CommonJS, which is this model resolution.
are static imports at the top, as in these are not dynamic. But import is dynamic import for ES6 modules, which is what we
Mm-hmm. So import is a dynamic is dynamically or is dynamic import from EX6 models. So the language itself evolved vastly to say, oh, what are the things that we need to do?
require was for CommonJS. So this is saying if something tries to render details, panic and load details. Vite is smart enough to look at that and say, hey, this is not required on the initial page load. I'm not going to load it right away.
Okay. Vid is smart enough. When you combine that with Vid, okay. But what about Webpack? Vid is smart enough to say, hey, this is a dynamic import. I'm not going to load that. And I'm going to load that right away. And I'm going to load it right away. because it's the server that once he analyze that code, it say, oh, okay, and I'm gonna load that uh, right away.
Okay? And then now we end up with these details and these search params uh, components, and these will not actually load until their route is actually loaded. Does that make sense?
Hmm. So they will not be loaded until the user navigate to those routes or to such route. Is that make sense? Does that make sense?
Components, and these will not
Hmm.
actually load until their route is actually loaded. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Does it make sense?
So we need to tell it, okay, we're going to load this later, but what happens when we hit something that we need to load?
Exactly. We're gonna load this later, but what happened when we need?
We're gonna, so we need to tell it, okay, we're going to load this later, but what happens when we hit something that we need to load?
Okay, we are we are going to. Okay, so we're going to load this later, but what happened when you load that row? But what happened when we hit something? What happened when we hit something? Yeah, but what happened when we hit something that we needed? Yeah, what happened when we need what happened when we hit something that we needed to load? Exactly. What happened when we hit something? Okay. So what happened when we hit something that we need to load? You know what I mean? What happened when we hit something that we needed to load? In other words, uh, if I click there, what will happen? Okay. We need to something to know if when I click there, when I hit something, when I change, when the user click on that, we need to load something because, especially, exactly because this is dynamic import. Okay. So what happened when we hit something? So we need to know. Uh, so now that we load this, so now that we tell the server, hey, load me this later, but we also need something to hit. Okay, because this is very English jargon. Okay, but we need something to hit but we need something to hit uh, that we need to load. In other words, it's like during loading. Okay, okay. What we need, so what will happen during that loading? We need something to hit that we need to load. That's what we use suspend. Okay, that's why we use suspend. Makes a lot of
We're going to do that with suspense.
sense. Use suspend. All right.
So inside your query client provider, put a component here called suspense, and that'll wrap everything inside of query client provider. And then we need to tell it what the fallback is.
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Exactly. So with suspense here, with suspense here, okay, with suspense here, because with suspense, what we're saying is that we need to do something. Okay, we tell it what we need to load dynamically, but we need to know what we need to tell is what will when we need something to hit when we need something to hit when that is but we need something to hit that we need to load, okay, but we need something to hit that we need to load. Exactly, we need something to hit that we need to load. We need something to hit that we need to load, and we need to show something during the loading. It's another way to do that. We need to hit something. We need to hit something during that load. We need to hit something uh, to load. Or what happened when we need to hit something to load? Okay, it's because this is part of the transfer here, the knowledge transfer in terms of this jargon here. But what happened when we need to hit something? Okay, so what happened when we need to hit something to load? You know what I mean? Okay, all right. Yeah. Totally, man. Okay. So far we have held vid or the server is like, okay, this is the route that we need to dynamically import. So the server will say, oh, and vid is smart enough to say, oh, okay, now this is something that I am not going to load right away, but also now that we indicate that we need to tell some, oh, what's happened when we need to tell something, what happened when what happened when we need to hit something to load? It means that we need to use suspense for that. And then you pass something called like the fallback here. Okay. Let me actually, in fact, is calling this suspend. Okay. And add this suspense here. And then you say, hey, we need something to fall back here. Okay. So what is the thing that you're gonna show during loading this? And again, the idea here is that it's going to load on route. This is part of the strategy, the techniques of code splitting. You're gonna do that per route. Mhm. So Vite in this case is smart enough to say that when the user navigate or when the route match, because it's this is when the route match, uh yeah, when the route match, now is when you're gonna load that bundle. Okay, so when the route match, now is when you're gonna load that bundle. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's where we use suspense. Okay, so when that route match, thanks to the view router, now you're gonna load that bundle.
If something inside of this is loading, what do we do? Well, we're going to show just like a nice little a loading pane with a h2 class name equals. Put whatever emoji you want in here. This is the loader.
This is what we're gonna
I
show
have just a
here.
spiral here,
Class name.
but feel free to put whatever emoji you want to put in there. If you want to have a loading dog, that's actually, let's do that. That'll be cute. We'll put a dog, and then we'll have like a spinning dog head.
Okay, the class
So that's what
name
suspense
here.
does. It basically says like,
Okay, class name here. Do.
hey, if you hit
Fallback here. Class name. loading pane and loader. Okay, loading pane. You're gonna find something inside of this as a div. Stands for the auto completion. Alright, what the fuck you think you're doing? Class name, and then you say class name loading, loader, almost loader, and you're gonna put some emoji here. Dog. Really? There's no dog here. There's no dog emoji. Oh my god. Why you're not showing that? Hello, hello, are you there? Oh my god. What the French toast? Dog. There you got it. Okay. So basically,
This high up in the render tree and something is loading, show the fallback until the suspense has returned. So that's what suspense does. It basically says like, hey, if you hit this high up in the render tree and something is loading, the spinning dog head. So that's what suspense does. It basically says like, hey, if you hit this high up in the render tree and
if you hit this high up in the render tree, if you hit this high up,
something is loading, show the fallback until the suspense has returned.
so basically what you're saying here with this, okay, so basically here what suspense does is if you hit if you hit something up here, which is on the render in the render tree, exactly. If you hit something up here in the, if you hear something up here in the render tree, exactly. If you hit something up here in the render tree, show the fallback until suspense has returned, which is show the fallback until suspense has until suspense has returned. But again, suspend is used is for this code splitting, this lazy loading, usually on routes. Okay.
And I need to restart my app. npm run dev. Notice when I load the page just for a very split second, it's all localhost, so everything's going really fast. But you probably even missed it because I missed it. Let's just put this back. So just to prove my point.
So now if we take a look, if we actually do this, and we say, oh my god, npm run, no, but here we are on the code splitting, see, code splitting, see, npm run def, okay. Now if I take a look at the browser here, where it's supposed to show that, here, hey, we look at that, it's actually load pretty fast, but that's exactly what we're telling here, is that hey, suspense. Uh, if someone hits the tree, if someone hits the tree, if someone hits, if someone, or if something hits the, if something hits up the tree here, show the fallback until until suspense is returned. That's what we're telling here. Hey, if someone hits here at the if someone hits up here in the render tree, which is when you pass through the suspense, if someone hits here in the suspense tree, show the fallback until suspense is returned. Okay. Okay. So the idea here is so basically so basically what you are saying, what you are which is pretty much that work uh, with other contexts, okay, or with other yeah with other contexts. So with other contexts or with other wrappers here, it's like, hey, when something hits here, I want you to do something. Okay. Uh, and in the case of suspense, so for example, in the case of browser router here, it actually is something here in the go. In the case of the browser router, it say, hey, when something hits here, when something hits here, I want you to do the logic that you hold behind the scenes. Okay, even though that you have a context, even though that you have some store here behind the scenes, this will give you this interaction of context. But again, that's what you tell it here. So when something hits here up the render tree in the browser router, I want you to do the logic, the respective logic for that, which is like, well, doing the client side routing, for example. So when something hits adopted pet context here, I want you to now provide is some value globally available to the entire application. You have to be careful with that. So when something hit up here in the render tree and look at the query client provider, hey, then I want you to now do this data fetching, catching, sync, and updating for that. When something hit up here in the render tree in the suspend, it's like, I want you to run this fallback, okay? It makes a lot of sense. I want you to run this fallback until suspend is returned. So this is the narrative that is building along the way, as you can see, and then you say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, especially when you are building this kind of application, these React applications, that each one of those stacks uh, reflect or talks about something that is doing behind the scenes. Okay, uh, and they allow you to enhance your applications or to provide your application with something. Okay, in this case, what it is providing is the client side routing. Okay, in the case here with adopted pet context is providing you a global store that can be accessed through the entire application. In the case of query client provider, it's something that you can now easily fetch data, catching, sync, and keep it an update with the server state. And in the case of suspend, is that hey, uh, when someone hits here, I'm gonna when someone hits here up the render tree, the suspend, I want now to show the fallback until suspense is returned, until any of this route here is being loaded. That's interesting because as you can see here, okay, as you can see here, what it is. Let me take a go to the router, to the browser here, and tell you to follow me, follow me along with this. And here we say, hey, the network. I want you to make the network here. I think it's here. No. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Uh, regular 3G. So if I reload this, first is loading is not rendering because that's the default. Okay. Holy moly. And as you can see, it actually loads. As you can see, it's now actually loading the dog icon. So that's what it's doing here. Okay, and to me it's interesting because it's actually is because right now I put the suspense at the top of this component, or in my case at the top of my renderer tree. It's like, all right, the reason I'm doing that is because I want to show is this nice little icon. Okay, nice little loading uh, to tell the user, hey, the application is loading. Okay, again, part also the stuff that we have talked previously when we mentioned about having a uh, code budget, useful especially for when you want to stay under a particular metric, or when or for performance timing to hit something. Okay, that is something that you need to have some code budget. So Web Vitals provide you uh, to that. However, if you're building, even if you're building internal web apps, that's very very important uh, to have this kind of metrics. The way to guarantee that your application actually works following is this standard, this Web Vitals metrics. All right. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And by using is lazy, what it's doing behind the scenes, this React function is indicate to Vid or the web server, hey, I don't want you to load this route, okay? Uh, Only do that when the route match. So you fetch the bundle. So only then you fetch the bundle. Good. Awesome. Awesome. Totally awesome, man. Totally awesome. Yep. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally awesome. All right. Cool. Cool. Totally, completely cool, bro. Okay. Yep. Yep. Yeah, yeah. All right. Nice.
If I go to my network tab and I look at all, so if I refresh the page, it can kind of be a little bit hard to make sense of this because of how Vite loads everything in dev.
Mm-hmm. But as you can see here, we create is this two chunks here. Code splitting, node model, V depths. You know, we have this. Again, it's because now our dev server is Vite, or if you're using Webpack, it's another way of doing that. That's one of the reasons you should take a look at that. No, let me actually do that bigger than this. Okay. So as you can see here, you are disgusting, man. And actually, you're not generating is nothing new, man. It's like you just stick there in. Uh, yeah. Anyway, um, chunk or code splitting vid. And as you can see here in the code split, in the code chunk splitting, that makes a lot of sense. In the download, come on, okay, in the downloads. No, I think it's an image here, right? Yeah, there you got it. Mm-hmm. Of course, you're not able to see that now, man. That's almost unreadable. That's almost unreadable. So what you can do here is perhaps cutting out here and then try to expand that a little bit. Much better. And it actually, vid is telling you what is, vid is telling you here, hey, what is, da, 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 da. And vid is telling you is what is, okay, the package that it used, but you can see here is vid. What is the package that I'm using to do this code splitting? Because if you don't indicate that, for example, if you say something like, so if you don't, now, if you go back here and then you say, hey, I want you now to fall back all of this, fall back, fall back, fall back, fall back, fall back, fall back. Oh, exactly. Fall back this. Or in other words, you look at the context here. So, or instead of loading that, okay, instead of loading that, we say, hey, let me go back to context here. Context, no. CV, CRT, say, hey, we need to go to context. Why 14 context, okay? And then you say, hey, npm run here, def. So now if you navigate to the website here, as you can see, here is actually the detail is being loaded initially, as well as the search pattern, you know, but all of that bundle is loaded initially. All of those bundles are loaded initially. So there is no code splitting here. All right. But if we now switch to the code splitting, then we run that. Say npm run def. Hey, vid, I want you to run this. And as you can see now, it's actually saying, hey, I'm not rendering anything here. And then I'm gonna show up is this icon, so you can now find access to that. And here we're generating is this two chunk. That's something interesting because these two chunks are now something that was generated by Vite here. And now when we navigate to that, which is for example to here, to details, yeah, to details here, now as you can see it's actually loading that, right? And here, actually load all of this and fetch pet, which is detail. After it loads that, there you go, we load is detail for that. Let me actually clear the cache here so we can actually see what is loading here. Alright, it's actually loading that nice little thing here. Search pattern is already here. So when we want to actually click on detail, exactly now it's loading detail here and that kind of thing. But all of these are in the cache. But he will not loading is those uh, bundles initially. That's the whole point of this. They're not bundled those. They're not bundled those initially.
The way that Vite works is it actually uses the browser's built-in module loader for all of your locally served things. How Vite loads everything and fetch the page. It can kind of be a little bit hard to make sense of this because of how Vite loads everything in depth.
Okay. It can be quite hard to understand how uh, what is this because how Vite works in depth and it is using
The way that Vite works is it actually uses the browser's built-in module loader.
mhm. So the way Vite works is that actually is using the browser built-in model. Mm-hmm.
For all of your locally served things.
Exactly, it's using the browser built-in models loader for all of your locally served things, for all of your locally server things. Exactly. This built-in model loader from the browser, okay, uh, which is part of the EX6. Like this is where you can how take a look at this JavaScript models and browser compatibility. So use of native JavaScript model is depend on the import and export statement. This is giving you a little bit of history about how is this a background on models here. For example, with import and export for that main models canvas.js square aside, and here exporting models. But if you want to say, hey, uh, but if you want to say, hey, dynamic model loading for this new functionality allows you to call import as a function, passing it the path of the model as a parameter. It returns a promise which fulfills with a model objects, creating a model objects, giving you access to the object exported, for example, which is here, giving you access to this. So it will return is the model object here if you're using import for that. So do something with the model. Let's take a look at the example here, dynamic model import. But this is what Brian Hall is describing here right now with JavaScript models. Okay. But again, let's going to stick to our thing here.
So that's why you see so much of this being loaded separately. But what you don't see here, oh, this chunk business, this is all coming from React, right? So when you're loading this in production, it's loading chunks at a time, right? So what's really cool about this is now if I load this, and I'm just going to close this, if I click on Luna here, it's going to load the details page, which has not been loaded yet, right? So I click on this, notice that it loaded this DOM chunk down here. Like all this stuff only came afterwards, right? So we've now split out this particular piece of code. That is code splitting. And honestly, what's cool about React is that's it. It's all you need to know about splitting code in React. Right now we're splitting on route, which is kind of like the most brain dead way of doing it, right? There's just now like, okay, we're going to split based on route, but there's lots of other things you can code split on, right? I actually don't so much of this being loaded separately. But what you don't see here, oh, this chunk business, this is all coming from
the chunk business here. So the chunk business, the chunk business here, the chunk business is coming from React, and that's what allows you to do that.
React, right? So when you're loading this in production, it's loading chunks at a time, right?
So when you are loading in production, so when you're loading this in production, so when you're loading this in production,
so
it is, yeah, when you're loading this in production, it is loading chunks, chunks. Okay, it is loading chunks of that.
What's really cool about this is now,
yeah, what's really cool about this is now we can load the detail page only when is required.
if I load this, and I'm just going to close this, if I click on Luna here, it's going to load the details page, which has not been loaded yet, right?
Exactly. Only when is required.
So I click on this.
It's that only when it is required. Because it hasn't loaded yet.
And I'm just going to close this. If I click on Luna here, it's going to load the details page, which has not been loaded yet, right?
Exactly. Which has not been loaded yet. Loaded yet.
So I click on this, notice that it loaded this DOM chunk down here. Like all this stuff only came afterwards, right? So we've now split out this particular piece of code.
So now we split out that particular code.
That is code splitting. Honestly, what's cool about React is that's it. It's all you need to know about splitting code in React. Right now we're splitting on route, which is kind of like the most brain dead way.
So right now we're splitting on route, which is kind of the most dead brain way of doing it. Brain dead brain. Kind of the most brain dead. Brain dead. Brain dead. Urban Dictionary, man. An incredibly idiotic individual who hasn't a substance for anything that is going on. Someone who doesn't catch on even to the simple things. Brain dead. Brain dead. Brain dead. Yeah, brain dead. Spanish, would you say brain dead? Muerte será no, pero es como revoludo.
Doing it right, there's just now like, okay, we're going to split based on route, but there's lots of
Brain
other things
dead.
you can code split on, right? I actually don't need the modal until someone actually clicks on the modal, right? So what do you do there? Let's just pop over and do it really quick. We're in details. Instead of loading modal, just delete that
Delete that.
and say
Then,
const modal equals lazy, which I'll load from React,
mhm,
function import dot slash modal, right? Now, if I click a doc Luna, it's going to flash for just a second on the loading, and then it'll show this, right? Again, we're going fast enough here. Let's just hard refresh the page here. You see the spinning dog head. If I click a doc Luna again, it's going to show that spinner, right? Because it's loading modal on the
it's going
fly.
to loading that model on the fly.
Now, everything that I've shown you so far is a massive waste, right? We've objectively.
So everything, yeah, everything that I have show you is a massive waste because
We made our app slow.
we have objectively made our app slower. We have objectively our app slower.
Because none of these bundles are very big.
Exactly. Because none of these bundles are very big.
Like our modal bundle is going to be a kilobyte at best, right? So splitting off a kilobyte, not worth it, right? You want to be splitting off like 30 kilobytes.
Exact. So it's splitting a kilobyte, not worth it. Splitting 30 kilobytes, 30, 50, splitting 30, 50, or 100 kilobytes.
50 kilobytes, 100 kilobytes, right? So let's pretend that the most.
Okay. So splitting 30, 50, or 100 kilobytes is what you want to is when you want to start, or is where you want to start.
Total loaded like all of moment.js for some weird reason. Great, code split that. That makes a ton of sense. But just to split something for the sake of splitting it, you're better off just leaving it in your bundle. So it's not a silver bullet. Please make sure that you're
hmm It's not a silver bullet.
measuring that you're actually making your user experience better rather than worse.
Please measuring that that you are making the user experience better, not worse.
You need to be splitting tens of kilobytes for its code splitting to make sense. That makes sense? So yeah, that's one of the points of caution with both this and server-side rendering. It's not necessarily always a better thing to do this. You need to make sure that
Exactly. It's not always uh, it's not always necessary to do this.
you're measuring your app, how your users are responding, those kind of metrics for you to really know I'm actually making a positive difference in my user's life. Because it's really kind of a shell game of performance. If I move something to make my initial paint faster, I'm making my time to interactivity worse, or like things like that. So just make sure
Shell game. What the fuck is shell game? Ah, shell game. ¿Dónde está la bolita? Shell game. Uh-huh. I love that analogy. Okay. I really, I really love that analogy.
kind of a shell measuring your app, how your users are responding, those kind of metrics for you to really know I'm actually making a positive difference in my user's life.
So it's not always necessary to do this. The shell game. Uh-huh.
Because it's really kind of a shell game of performance. If I
This this can become really like a shell game, like a shell game of performance.
move something to make my initial paint faster, I'm making my time
If I move something to make if I move something to make my initial pain faster,
back interactivity work.
I'm making my time deck interactivity worse. I'm I'm making I'm making mhm. I'm making my time interactivity worse.
Or like things like that.
The shell game. If I improve, yeah. If I move something to make if I if I move something to make my initial page if I move something to make my initial page faster, I'm making my interactivity I'm making my time interactivity deck I'm making my time deck I'm making my time deck interactivity worse.
So just make sure you're keeping all that stuff in your mind. So very contrived example, but you know,
Contractive. Contractive. Very ideal scenarios. Contractive. Contrive.
things like that. So just make sure you're keeping all that stuff in your mind. So very contrived example.
Contrive. Very contrived ideal scenario.
But it can be super useful. If you have a huge application, you have to do code splitting in order to get decent performance.
In order to get decent performance. So if you have a big app, you need to do code splitting to get decent performance.
Okay. Any questions about code splitting? Where does the code rest when we put it lazy? Will it be downloaded immediately once the app loads, or downloaded only when required? So where does
So where is the code rested when you do lazy? I think in the main memory. Where is the code rested when you do lazy?
put it rest when we put it lazy? Will it be downloaded immediately?
Where the code where is the code rest where is the code rested when you do lazy? When you do lazy, when you
Once
do
that loads, or downloaded only when required? So what happens here with like import? Right now, the way that we have this set up, modal will only be requested. Notice this is a function, right? Once this function is invoked, right? So lazy will only call this function once it's actually trying to be rendered, right? And then suspense will catch that, and suspense will allow that to be paused while we load modal in the background. A very valid next question to ask there is, can we get optimistic about it? Can we load stuff in the background? The answer is yes, we definitely can. We're now adding like another factor of complexity here by doing that. The best way to load stuff in the background.
okay. Okay. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.